To think about how much still hasn't changed. We still, like, we were celebrating the 50-something memorial, but we still were talking about the same thing, just different versions of it, I guess. But those fundamental issues haven't really changed.
You have to be vigilant because if you don't pay attention, you go right back to those times.
And I think that's really my fear as we move forward, because now we have a new president, but I don't want that to mean that we stop trying, that we stop working, because that's exactly how it'll come right back around.
Whenever you go backwards, the arc, when you fight for progress, the arc goes a little more ahead. So you are going forward, but you also have to fight about going back, you know?
Yeah. And I think that's an important thing to think about, because especially when you think about how much really hasn't changed, it's easy to feel defeated, feel like it's pointless. But I think every activist has to try to address that for themselves, knowing that you will work your entire life and nothing will really change. But you just think about what would happen if nobody did anything.
Exactly.
Facing modern governance challenges, aid-reliant island nations were easily indebted.
Tonga took on a lot of Chinese debt and has been not in a position to pay that debt back.
But with limited income sources, people are bracing for the outcome.
My biggest fear is one day our ports will be owned by China.
Al Jazeera explores the hard reality of the economic tug-of-war between the US and China through the eyes of those worried about the future of their islands. Fight for the Pacific, Business Wars on Al Jazeera.
The ICC doesn't have a police force. Who is arresting Netanyahu today? Who's arresting Putin?
The fact that you cannot arrest today doesn't mean that you will not be able to arrest tomorrow.
Ken Roth speaks with former ICC President Sylvia Fernandez de Gamendi.
What has the ICC accomplished so far?
The court has helped to develop the law on international crimes. Justice is a component of international relations, but it's not the only component.
Reframe on Al Jazeera.
Bold and untold stories from Asia and the Pacific on Al Jazeera.
Protests and panic in Los Angeles after a second day of immigration raids by federal agents. I'm Kerry Johnston. This is Al Jazeera live from Doha. Also coming up. Israeli forces flatten homes and neighborhoods across Gaza, killing more than 70 people. Dozens are trapped under the rubble. Expectant mothers in Gaza face an increasing risk of losing their babies because of Israel's blockade on medical supplies into the Strip. And All in Harmony, a musical program in Colombia that's proving life-changing for people with disabilities. There's been a second night of battles between riot police and protesters in America's second biggest city after military-style immigration raids. The targeting of workers in Los Angeles has created anger and fear. Well, police have fired tear gas and flashbangs at crowds. On Friday, masked federal agents in armored vehicles detained dozens of people in a series of immigration sweeps. There have been more operations on Saturday. A top priority of the Trump administration is an overhaul of the US immigration system. There's been a backlash from senior Democrats as well as Los Angeles leaders. But top White House and Trump administration officials are unrepentant. Trump's top White House aide, Stephen Miller, has described the protests as an insurrection against the laws and sovereignty of the United States. Miller is behind the push to increase immigration arrests. And when the Democratic mayor of Los Angeles, Karen Bass, posted on social media condemning the Immigration and Customs Enforcement raids, saying, "We will not stand for this," the FBI director, Kash Patel, replied to her post saying, "We will." Well, Rob Reynolds has been in the heart of the protests in Los Angeles. What more can you tell us about the current situation, Rob?
Well, Kerry, right now it seems that the police massive show of force has pretty much dispersed most of the demonstrators who had gathered over the past several hours in this area. There's a definite smell or tang of tear gas in the air. Police have been using their flashbang munitions. We've seen at least one protester arrested. There may have been more, but we didn't witness it ourselves. Protesters gathered earlier when reports surfaced in the neighborhood that immigration agents had been mounting a raid at a nearby home goods store where a lot of undocumented migrants seek day labor work. And that immediately, that word spread like wildfire through the neighborhood. You can hear those flashbangs behind me, by the way. They've been going off continuously, so I don't even notice them, but you can definitely hear them in the background. So people gathered, they confronted the police, they were shouting at the police. The police stood and created kind of a line, and then gradually they moved the line forward. They moved policemen from this area to this direction. They bottled up the protesters, pushed them off into side streets, and most of them have now heeded the repeated warnings broadcast by helicopter and bullhorn that they were constituted an unlawful assembly, and they are now subject to arrest or to being harmed by chemical irritants or non-lethal projectiles. So most of the people appear to have left. The police seem to have the situation and the streets to themselves now. Still some activity obviously going on behind me. We've also seen protesters throwing fireworks, loud explosive types of commercial fireworks at the police. So there's been some give and take back and forth on that. But by and large, I haven't seen a lot of violence or any violence really, other than a couple of plastic bottles of water being tossed at police lines. So this is day two of extreme confrontations between police and protesters, all as the Trump administration ramps up its raids and seeking to enforce its policies against undocumented migrants here in Southern California, which of course is a epicenter of liberal politics, of resistance to Trump and his policies, and a neighborhood, by the way, where I am right now in South Los Angeles, with a very, very high Latino population, a very high minority population, people who feel some kinship perhaps with the undocumented migrants who come here seeking work from places like Mexico, Guatemala, Honduras, and elsewhere. So again, to recap what's going on here now, police seem to have seized control of the situation. There are still some pockets of protesters, but the street has been cleared. And as far as what actually transpired in that raid at the building supply warehouse, we don't know how many people were arrested, if any. There are conflicting reports on that, but it doesn't seem as if the series of enforcement actions, raids, if you will, by the Trump administration's enforcement of migration laws is going to end in this area anytime soon.
With that update on the ground for us there, Rob, thank you. Well, Mark Christopher is an immigration attorney representing a number of people arrested by federal agents in several states. He explains how the Trump administration is trying to make it harder to represent detainees.
What we're seeing is just a massive increase in the amount of arrests and the amount of enforcement being done by Immigration and Customs Enforcement. What we're seeing is an increase in just the number of people. In the past, what we have seen is where immigration would focus on individuals who had maybe committed crimes or had been arrested or something of that nature. Now it's more indiscriminate. Even we're seeing people who are people arrested in schools, parents arrested in schools. And let me give you an example. I have a client of mine who was recently arrested by ICE. He happened to work at a farm. ICE had gone onto the farm seeking another individual, had happened to ask him about his immigration status, and then took him into custody. He had been here for a number of years, had family here in the United States, had no criminal record whatsoever. And he just seemed to be in the wrong place at the wrong time. And for us to get him a bond, to get him out, it took more than a month and a half that he was staying in custody at U.S. taxpayer expense. In most instances, you have the right to go in front of a federal immigration judge. At that point, you can then potentially request bond to get out and to fight your immigration case outside of being detained. For many, what we're seeing though, and what's changed is that we're seeing that they are very, they being immigration, they're very reluctant to give bond. And so that makes it more difficult to present their legal case, because as an attorney, I'm now working with somebody who is detained. I have very limited access to them. It's much harder to present and to put together the case. In most cases, yes, you do have the chance to, the opportunity to contest it, although the current administration is making it much harder to do that.
Dozens of Palestinians are believed trapped under rubble after Israeli attacks on people seeking shelter across Gaza. Several strikes hit a building in Gaza City housing many members of one family. At least 16 were killed, including children. Civil defense teams are searching for 85 people said to be trapped in the debris. Across the Strip, Israeli strikes killed more than 70 Palestinians on Saturday. Ibrahim Al-Khalili reports now from the site of airstrikes in Gaza City.
I'm now standing in a Sabra neighborhood in Gaza City, where the Israeli fighter jets have targeted this residential building behind me and flattened it down. As you can clearly see, many Palestinians have been confirmed killed and dozens were injured and transported to the nearest hospital. This is the aftermath of what the residents here are calling one of the deadliest attacks, as many Palestinians have been confirmed killed due to this brutality of the attack. In the light of the ongoing Israeli military's continuation of attacks targeting several areas across the Gaza Strip, and worth mentioning is that this is the second day of Eid where civilians should be celebrating the holy festivities that should be held, but they ended up being targeted and brutally killed.
The Israeli occupation targeted a residential building in the Al Sabra neighborhood without warning. It belonged to the Abu Sharia family. This is not the first building to be targeted since the beginning of Eid al-Adha. Several buildings have been hit, and these attacks have killed numerous civilians. This is truly a full-fledged massacre. No warning, no alert, a building full of civilians. A large number of people were inside the house at the time of the strike. Since the moment of the attack, rescue teams have been working on search and recovery operations. There are a number of people still trapped under the rubble of this building. Several children and women have been pulled out and transferred to hospitals.
As you can see, we are neighbors of the Abu Sharia family. May God hold the Israeli forces and Netanyahu accountable. There was no notice that a strike was going to happen here. If they had given any kind of warning, none of this would have happened. The Israelis are committing genocide. This is our home. Look at what happened to it. We evacuated wounded elderly people and young children.
We are living the second day of Eid, when children are supposed to be in amusement parks, gardens and parks, carrying their toys and wearing Eid clothes. However, we are pulling our children out from under the rubble in torn pieces. Eid clothes have become the white shroud, and this is due to the occupation.
The situation here is apocalyptic, and there are still many people stuck under the rubble. The scale of devastation is unprecedented. We can clearly see the adjacent buildings also have been affected due to this brutal attack that came without any prior warning. Ibrahim Al-Khalili, Al Jazeera, Gaza City, Palestine.
Israeli forces have killed 8 Palestinians seeking food in southern Gaza. The distribution center near Rafah is operated by the controversial US and Israeli-backed Gaza Humanitarian Foundation. The group says it could not operate on Saturday because of threats from Hamas. Hamas rejects the accusations. Israeli forces have killed at least 118 people near the foundation's sites in less than 2 weeks. Well, lack of food and constant Israeli attacks mean expectant mothers are facing a greater risk of miscarriage and premature births. Israeli forces have prevented medical supplies such as iron supplements and prenatal vitamins from entering the Strip. Tariq Abba Azum reports from Deir al-Balah.
In Gaza, the first cries of life are getting fainter. Some never come at all. The cost of starvation is now being measured in lives that ended before they even began.
Lately, we noticed increasing number of low birth weight babies, and most of them, the main cause was the malnutrition to their mothers. As everyone know that for the last 3 months in Gaza, there is no suitable nutrition are coming in Gaza. So the mothers here are suffering from severe malnutrition during their pregnancy, which leading to premature delivery as well as low birth weight to their babies.
The Gaza Media Office says more than 300 women lost their pregnancies in 80 days, a direct result of hunger, trauma, and the total collapse of prenatal care, worsened by Israel's total blockade of the Strip.
I lost my baby because of malnutrition and the lack of proper food. Most days, all I had was bread, sometimes mixed with sand and canned goods. It wasn't enough to keep me or my baby healthy. Some days, we had to skip meals entirely.
Doctors say many of these children will suffer lifelong complications if they survive at all. Malnutrition inside the womb has already robbed them of a healthy start to life. In Gaza, babies are dying before they learn to breathe. Mothers are burying them before they have names. And the siege meant to stop has become a death sentence for the unborn. Tariq Abba Azum, Al Jazeera, Deir al-Balah, Palestine.
Dr. Brenda Kelly is a consultant obstetrician and subspecialist in maternal and fetal medicine at Oxford University Hospitals. She says Israel has created a lethal mix of conditions for pregnant mothers in Gaza.
Even before October 23, we know that the ongoing blockade of Gaza had already compromised the health of many pregnant women who were already struggling with things like anemia in pregnancy. But what we're seeing now is a direct impact, a direct fallout of Israel's weaponizing of hunger in Gaza, impacting babies' growth, and growth restriction is one of the leading causes of miscarriage and stillbirth. But what I would say is that this is happening on top of the chronic severe stress and the psychological trauma, the lack of safe shelter, and that repeated displacement that we're seeing in Gaza. So that combined with the severe malnutrition that we're seeing creates this lethal mix of factors which will be behind the staggering rise in stillbirth and miscarriage and preterm birth and low birth weight. It's only going to get worse. There's no semblance of hope that Israel has any intention of lifting the blockade. And I think it's incumbent upon every nation outside Israel to hold them to account on this weaponizing of hunger. This is going to increase. And I suspect the numbers that we're hearing are very much an underrepresentation. We do not have the data collection within Gaza. We don't have the capacity to actually collect those data around miscarriage. And I will also just talk about that tragedy of the miscarriages. Many women are already so weakened by hunger. Experiencing a miscarriage is dreadful at the best of times, but when you actually are bleeding and in sort of very overcrowded circumstances without access to hygiene facilities, one cannot even begin to imagine how that feels for that grieving mother.
Still ahead here on Al Jazeera, Russian drone attacks on Ukraine's second biggest city. We hear from residents caught in the bombardment. Plus, broke and broken, how a Romanian who went to work in a richer European country returned with big health issues.
Hey there, here's how it's looking across the Americas on Sunday. Finally, rain coming in where wildfires are burning in Canada around Flin Flon, Manitoba, close to the border with Saskatchewan. But the only thing is, these winds will be fairly fast, so we got to watch out to see if those fires do spread. Hot for the Pacific Northwest, at least in Portland, 35 degrees. And it's also hot in Nevada State, Arizona State. Temperatures there are crossing 40 degrees in Vegas and Phoenix. A lot of activity, though, for the southern states, especially by the time Sunday is up. I think around Oklahoma and Texas could see outbreaks of severe weather there. It's still raining around the mid-Atlantic, the U.S. Northeast, and it is a wet and windy day for Canada's Newfoundland province, St. John's. 21 will be the number for you. Off we go to Central America. That rain's still pouring in around Honduras, Nicaragua, Costa Rica, and Panama. But if I take you to Mexico, we've got disturbed weather off the Pacific coast here. So that's going to feed rain in from Acapulco to Manzanillo on Sunday. Here we go for the top end of South America. It's our usual problem spots, but from Bolivia to that southeast corner of Brazil, rain and showers along that line. And for Patagonia, not a bad day in Comodoro Rivadavia with a high of 12 degrees on Sunday.
We'll wake early today, my lovely, to see the sun rising over our Uzbekistan. I'll weave your hair for you beautifully, just like the roads that stretch further than you can see. The sun will smile on you. You'll see our glorious land, bathed in its golden rays. Open your heart and embrace the magic. Uzbekistan, crossroads of civilizations.
Here at Al Jazeera, a reminder of our top stories now. Protesters and police in Los Angeles are facing off for a second day. There's anger and fear over a series of military-style immigration raids targeting workers and day laborers in the city. Dozens of Palestinians are believed trapped under rubble after Israeli attacks on people seeking shelter across Gaza. An attack in Gaza City killed 16 people, including children. Israeli strikes killed more than 70 Palestinians on Saturday. And lack of food and constant Israeli attacks are increasing the risk of miscarriage and premature birth among expectant mothers in Gaza. Health officials are warning that the lives of at least 50,000 pregnant and nursing women are at risk. Israeli protesters are condemning the killing of Palestinian children in Gaza. Demonstrators held up pictures of dozens of children who've died during Israel's war. Crowds gathered outside the Ministry of Defense and several other locations in Tel Aviv. They're calling for an immediate ceasefire and the release of captives still held in Gaza. UNICEF says Israeli forces have reportedly killed or wounded more than 50,000 children since the war began.
We are fully aware that what stands between us and getting all our loved ones back is Netanyahu's refusal to end the war. Mr. Witkoff, please, present Hamas and Netanyahu with an ultimatum to end the war. That is likely the only way to get our hostages back and save the state of Israel from complete destruction.
It's very frustrating because we're not getting our point across. Hostages are still there. The war unnecessarily is going on. It's a very painful position, and so I feel that I have to be here to voice my opposition to what this government is doing.
Tens of thousands of people have rallied in Italy's capital, Rome, demanding an immediate ceasefire in Gaza. Opposition parties organised the demonstration, accusing the government of remaining silent over the war. They say Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni's criticism of Israel hasn't been strong enough.
The Italian government follows what the US does, so it has no say in the matter. Right now it is making like an ostrich with its head underground. It is not reacting despite an abnormal massacre, despite an absolutely cruel and inappropriate reaction. The government remains silent. We are here to demonstrate against the silence of the government, but above all for Palestine, for peace, and also for Israel.
Obviously, what is happening in Gaza is a shameful thing. Netanyahu continues to bomb every day. So many people die. I am here, like I think everyone else, to say enough of this massacre in Gaza. This is the meaning of the demonstration.
Ukraine's president says his country will not yield to pressure after Russian forces carried out strikes on the northeastern city of Kharkiv. More than 40 explosions were reported in 90 minutes in the first wave. Kharkiv's mayor says the airstrikes killed at least 4 people and injured 38. In the southern city of Kherson, authorities say 2 people were killed in an attack on a residential building.
I was here and my daughter was in the next room. I didn't even hear an explosion, just a click. When I opened the door, there was dust everywhere.
The drones were buzzing closer and closer, and finally, when the sound was right over our house, we took our dog and cats and hid behind the wall in the corridor. We sat down on the floor and then it hit.
We must not weaken any form of pressure on Russia, neither the formats already applied nor the methods of pressure being prepared. The Russians are preparing to continue the war, ignoring all peace proposals. They must be held accountable for this.
A Ukrainian security official says Russia's statement that Kyiv has delayed a major exchange of prisoners and dead soldiers isn't true, and has accused Moscow of playing dirty games. Russia's defense ministry released this video, which appears to show refrigerated trucks carrying the bodies of Ukrainian soldiers in Belarus near the Ukrainian border. The warring parties agreed to the exchange during ceasefire talks in Turkey last week. The swap was expected to begin on Saturday.
According to the schedule agreed in Istanbul, the exchanges had to be started today. Our representatives came to the border at the exchange point, but unfortunately, and we do not understand why, but until now there are no Ukrainian representatives, there is no Ukrainian delegation, and there are no lists. Once again, we urge Ukrainian negotiators to maintain strictly the achieved agreements. Families are waiting for their sons and husbands. Thousands of families will have a chance to bury with respect and in the Christian custom their servicemen. We are at a place, we are ready to maintain all the agreements. We urge you to take your servicemen, accept POWs and ill servicemen. Let's do what people should do.
Iran has rejected accusations by the UN nuclear watchdog that it's not meeting its obligations under an international agreement. An IAEA report released last week found Iran has produced a record amount of near-weapons-grade enriched uranium. It characterized the findings as a serious concern. Tehran maintains its nuclear program is for peaceful purposes. Doctors Without Borders says a cholera outbreak in Sudan is getting worse. More than 1,000 cases are being reported daily in Khartoum. The medical organization is warning the waterborne disease is spreading rapidly as people return to the capital. Government forces retook the city from the paramilitary rapid support forces last month. Now, companies in Romania are struggling with severe labor shortages as more than a quarter of the population has left to work abroad due to a lack of opportunity. Many workers then send money back home after finding jobs in wealthier EU countries. But as Step Larsen discovered, of those who do return home, some do so with serious health problems.
Back home in Romania, 35-year-old Vasily is partially paralyzed and barely able to speak. Aged 18, he left for Western Europe, earning a salary he would never get at home. He worked in meat factories in Belgium and the Netherlands and met his girlfriend Tatiana. Life seemed good until that day in March 2022.
His boss told him to work harder and faster, so he tried. He always worked hard, but that time he accidentally stabbed himself and the knife cut his groin.
His skull needed to be lifted due to the loss of blood. Because he worked on a Romanian contract for a Dutch company, nobody took responsibility. For 3 years, the couple fought for financial compensation.
He is destroyed. His life is destroyed. He cannot use his hands. He cannot speak. Thank God he is still alive, but God knows what he can do with his life.
Vasily is one of millions living in poor areas trying their luck abroad, and one of hundreds returning broke and broken. Migrants from Romania bring back vital foreign currency, but often suffer from poor working conditions and fewer protections than local workers.
My impression is that we want to have them in this weak legal position as a way to reduce the cost, to have the workforce flexible, and to make them dependent in a way or another on the work available there in this sector.
This is what freedom of movement inside the European Union looks like in Romania. Depopulated villages and towns left by people now earning 3 or 4 times as much in richer European countries. A freedom that has come at such a high price that some say Europe's single market should not only provide freedom of movement, but also a freedom to stay. In Ani Noasa, more than 70% of the population has left after the mines closed.
The authorities should provide jobs, open factories. If there is no work, people will leave. I can sit in my shop for hours and nobody comes and nobody crosses the street.
Vasily finally got good news after an insurance company in the Netherlands decided to compensate him. Although money won't bring back the healthy young man he once was. Step Vassen, Al Jazeera, Transylvania, Romania.
And in part 3 of her series, Step investigates Greece's demand for migrant workers as an ageing population leaves a gap in the labour market. You can watch that here on Al Jazeera from Sunday. Now, an innovative programme in Colombia is breaking barriers and transforming perceptions of young adults with Down syndrome, severe autism and other cognitive challenges. Alessandro Rampiete has more on how Medellin's Philharmonic Orchestra is showcasing their musical talents.
At Medellin's Philharmonic, talent knows no limits. For the past 8 years, the orchestra has welcomed aspiring musicians with Down syndrome and other intellectual disabilities. Like Kelly Montoya, who says the program gave her confidence and helped her overcome discrimination.
It's really hard for society to accept someone like me. I've been through so much. People judge you for the smallest things. I was bullied since I was little, and that left a mark. But I really like how the Philharmonic includes us, letting us feel useful, respected, and not judged.
Advanced members perform in public concerts with the orchestra twice a year. And everyone joins open rehearsals that offer both musical training and community. Teachers say the goal is to support adults with disabilities and their families who are often left out.
There are programs for kids, but once they reach adolescence or adulthood, those opportunities disappear. They will need these spaces to grow.
For these students, these rehearsals go beyond the music. Therapists say that singing and playing activates both sides of the brain, helping their focus, coordination, and social skills, no matter the diagnosis.
Music is not a verbal language. It's open and accessible to everyone, even if we don't speak or have difficulty speaking or struggle to connect with others. Music is a space where we'll always be able to communicate.
Affected by mild schizophrenia and cognitive impairment, 33-year-old Jenny Baena says the program has been life-changing.
It transformed me because often we forget to look inward to see what we need to express.
There are so many things pulling our attention away, but these spaces help us reflect, see what's within us, and figure out what can support us so that we can then give to others.
Sentiments shared by her mother Lysiria, she says the program opened up Jenny's life and left them feeling less isolated.
It's helped her mental health. She's calmer, more relaxed. Now she socializes with people her age, doesn't isolate, and she's much happier. These young people give you something incredible given the chance. They make you a better human being.
A quiet revolution, one note at a time, proving that opportunities and talent speak louder than disabilities. Alessandro Ampietti, Al Jazeera, Medellin.
You can discover more on our website. Just head to aljazeera.com. The news continues here after Fight for the Pacific. Stay with us.
Ni vla pula family sab lo crown ya. Mi one lo la customer na inside lo crown. Forest is very important because you may use some forest lo leaf, you may use some forest lo karam kakai, food like food. Our life is depend on the forest and land. Got one Chinese company kami make them looking inside. Kami mas talem straight. Se mi vlen happy lo work le molikam, only no one folem lo blo forestry, only no one folem lo blo tipa environment, only no one listen to anybody.
Nivano's strength is weak because we do not have the money to sustain ourselves. So we have to rely on outsiders. The reason we rely on outsiders is the money. If we say no, then that means there will be no money to Vanuatu. This is where they put the rope on our neck.
Logging or investors coming in for resources in the extractive space, I don't think they see how much vulnerable the communities are and what the connection between people and resources here, the connection between people and the trees, the connection between people and the land. For me, my upbringing is like we were never thought about the monetary value of these resources. We were taught about the importance of having them maintained for generations ahead.
This one, Chinese company will come inside to make them blocking the place. Time we come inside, and me ask them some lo mi fala, lo come inside, but me for one, what them family blow me fala no agree. Before they come inside, lo make them blocking lo area blow me fala, only use one talk lo convince mo lanona, only tell them all same say. Once me will start blocking, but me will fix him road. Road blue fly start local tie, come to place every road, probably fix him. And then number two promise blockata, said, probably make him blocking, probably help me blow, build him up schools, primary schools blow me fly. And number three something, only promise, very strongly blow, run him one full water supply system, blow whole community. And then after low few months stop quote amol start making blocking me life animal say wrong by no true from say one only promise him only no make him.
A newer complaint or a newer concern has been around Chinese businesses moving into rural areas. There's certainly been plenty of stories of issues where the Labour Office has had to intervene and resolve a dispute.
But now you saw looking more local sapio, we've been cut them out lo end lo last year. Up until now, only no move them out every loki. One little consequences when me vela staff SM naya, local town, me vela no sabe what time by the carremico, what time by the pem. Me had some Kaufman. Lo Kaufman he must look immediately. Lo work with Chinese company stop go. Stop making naya lo leries me particularly santo. Before only cause same problem when me vela staff SM naya lo some narvala island.
So many leaders today, they just focus for their self-benefit. Vanuatu is on fire because the decision-making is collapsing. Why? Because of money. So the decision they make is just for their money. If we are not so careful, then tomorrow the whole economy will be in the hands of foreigners, like Chinese, because they're moving so fast.
There are some unfriendly rhetoric to China and the Chinese people, which is unfair. I think, given time, the majority of the people, especially those who are misled, they will see China is a friend. China is an opportunity.
The smoke, that's what cooks the food.
Welcome back to your breakfast show with Radio Nuku'alofa 88.6 FM.
The stigma around the Chinese is definitely more than the stigma around the New Zealanders, Australians, and the Americans that's here in the Kingdom of Tonga. Should we be worried about all of them, or is it just China that we should be worried about? That's it on the breakfast show. Hope you guys have a beautiful day. This very next song going out to everybody out there. So this is the Chinese embassy residence. They lease a massive piece of land for their government. So it's definitely visual that they're here in the Kingdom of Tonga. You asked me if they own petrol station. They've recently bought this one from a Tongan owner. So now it belongs to the Chinese. I know they started off with retail and they're getting into a lot of other stuff here in the Kingdom of Tonga. Look at that, guys. This is lamb flaps. Tongan families, every Saturdays, they do a little barbecue and they set it out to make some money. Most of these little barbecue spots are now owned by Chinese. I know the perception of China, if you speak to a majority, it won't be good. There's a lot of people, whether it's retail business or farmers, anyone that the Chinese has come in to do similar business, have a problem with them.
Oh, the business running the store. It started from my parents since 1964. Busy all the time when my parents ran the store. But when the Chinese came in, everything goes down.
When people like the Chinese people come here to build their stores, it shows development. But with what cost? Why has government opened it up for these investors to come and compete with the locals and potentially kill them?
Chinese gonna hold the country. Maybe Chinese gonna run Tonga. I think right now, 99% of the business store here in Tonga belong to the Chinese. Only 1% belong to us.
I think the business collaboration, basically mutual benefits, and maybe there are some competition, but if you look at the bigger pictures, our relationship has been very much positive and constructive and very well received even by the local people out there.
I want to tell the Chinese, please try to get back their Chinese people. Go back to Chinese. Let us stay here in our country and have free country. 1 or 2 years from now, I'm going to die. I mean the business. Maybe. I feel right now, no more. It can't develop.
They're not to blame. It's the government to blame. It's the government who opened the door. It's the government who not just welcomed them into our country, but also made it easy for them to be able to trade here in our country.
We believe in competitions, and we also have a preferential treatment for Tongans. There are certain sectors that are reserved for Tongans, but at the same time, yes, business might feel unfair that they are competing as Chinese, but at the same time, Chinese are providing shops at places that are not currently provided by Tongans. There are differences of views. The competition is pretty strong from the Chinese. There are communities that actually depend on Chinese shops. How do we actually balance that off? Yeah.
Pre-riots, government was a monarchy government. The king would pick the ministers and then also pick the prime minister. The democracy movement was to have it that it would be the people's government. There was a strike, there was a government workers' strike, there was a lot of strikes. The day it happened, they would have speeches by the leaders of this democracy movement, and it was received by a crowd that was intoxicated. The speeches that they heard, it fired them up, and then they went around and started smashing at the building from the Prime Minister's office and went all the way down to Shoreline. They went from one end of the town to the other end of town, smashing the buildings, and then they came back and burned down the city.
Tonga took on a lot of Chinese debt to basically rebuild the CBD in Nuku'alofa and has been not in a position to pay that debt back. The debt is with the China Exim Bank, which generally doesn't forgive debt.
I did ask the Chinese ambassador, what if Tonga tells you that they cannot pay the loan? His answer was, then we'll go into a friendly negotiation with Tonga. I don't believe it will be friendly, but I believe Tonga is going to lose something to China. What that is, I'm not sure.
Okay, hello. Of course, it's going to be hard. We have to make hard decisions, including having to cut certain areas so that we can service the loan. It's hard, but we're trying to meet our obligation.
Debt is a significant concern in the Pacific. Taking on debt from China is part of that concern, as is taking on debt from the World Bank or the ADB or anybody else.
It would be very much unfair to frame China as the only person to hold their debt. It's an international community and many other people, many other institutions hold their debt.
My biggest fear is one day our ports, our airports, places where revenue comes in, will be owned by China.
The Pacific has never been a priority of the Western world. I think that's how China has come into the Pacific, because they've seen the gaps. The Western world has been sleeping right at the door, and they've just totally ignored us. And that's why China is saying, I'll come and look after the Pacific. And then at the same time, nobody comes and does something for nothing.
Debt trap diplomacy is being evident in Sri Lanka and in some parts of Africa, where they need to step up their loan repayment with China, or China will seize some of their assets. I think Vanuatu should be very careful when dealing with China.
If you're looking at the world from the U.S. perspective, you can see these infrastructure developments as being the potential for China to put a military presence in these areas. And because of the debt deals, some of these countries may not be able to avoid the pressure that China may decide to bring to allow the positioning of some of their military assets in their countries.
Speculation about China were going to build the so-called military bases in the region. This is absolutely nonsense and disinformation.
Santa was in need of a new wharf. There were concerns in 2018 that China was trying to persuade Vanuatu to let them open a military base. People have said to me, oh, well, that wharf could be dual purpose. There have been loads of military ships tied up there. We've had the French, we've had the Australians, we've had the US. Do you know who hasn't tied up at that wharf? Is China. Yet.
Me one captain. Me work lo Solota since we finished school. Me corab lo plesa me since me small me start swim lo small part lo area now. Even me harvest them fish, me fishing or spear dive. Suppose I think suppose lo one put la fuse suppose li pinistawan de putuan pigulaw so li putum town lo one industrial zone. Magam se kat full of fish, but after we building wharf, pull up the reef only dead. So life lo small fish too in mokat. So you had lo like as a fish.
Vanuatu, like a lot of Pacific Island countries, has a significant need for infrastructure, including critical infrastructure like wharves and airfields, so that people and stuff can move around.
Before wharf play me, one small wharf no more, but this time after lo help lo Chinese government come lo construct them wharf here, make me pick one. I think wharf here me one lo longest wharf lo Pacific, supposed to be correct.
So they want to extend the wharf so that we can export more copra. The government also want to attract tourists to come to Santo. So the only way of doing that is we have to expand the wharf.
Whenever we provide assistance to the Pacific countries, we do not force our will upon the Pacific countries. We always consult them what they need. This is the reason why more and more Pacific countries are tending to work with China for their national modernization and for their social and economic development.
Especially one place from you spell. Karamol kids only come down, only swim, enjoy the day. Pay no more.
It's difficult for Vanuatu to repay its loan. Where is the money coming from? It's supposed to be coming from our local economy, but it's weak.
I'm very concerned about paying back, because hearing from other places in the world that if you cannot pay back the loan to China, then maybe China might say, oh, we might have one of these islands as a repayment.
So me happen say come say one day by Chinese me take over them by me want people impact lo environment to mo community blow nila.
It goes back to the principle, there's no such thing as a free lunch. Whether it's Australia, New Zealand, US, China, it's the same principle. When you go around Samoa right now, you see a lot of the businesses are all Chinese-owned. So for me, the main concern I have is what will be left for our future generations.
I think it's really important that we acknowledge that the Chinese are part of our recent history. They have been a part of Samoa's economic development. I think it's really important that we bring everybody together, and so that we are not just talking about issues and challenges, but we're talking also about solutions moving forward. This is my Uncle Tautai Le Sam's residence, and also happens to be the place where my grandparents are buried. So behind me, this is Sing Chao Le Sam. He is from the south of China. He came here as one of the indentured laborers, and he met my grandmother, and they got married and had 15 children. He was an only child. Maybe that was the motivation to have all these children. And there was also no TV at the time, so that was entertainment.
When people hear about the Chinese in Samoa, the first thing that kind of gets brought out is the idea of, the rising China, which is kind of the discourse that's all around the world. The relationship between Chinese and Samoan people goes back more than 100 years.
This is the cemetery for all the Chinese dating back to the early 1900s. We're trying to raise some funds so that we can do some renovations as part of our service of appreciation to those who came before us.
There are Samoan Chinese families. We think of them as Samoan, even though they've got Chinese-sounding last names. This is the kind of history that we need to also take into consideration when we think about the relationship between China and Samoa.
I come in Samoa already 24 years. This is my second home. My kids all born in Samoa. Essentially, yeah. We're making nice friends.
Yeah. There are 4 waves of Chinese migration. The first wave was the free merchants. In the late 1800s, the Germans brought in indentured laborers. That was the beginning of the second wave. The descendants of the second wave and the first wave were able to bring their relatives over, and that's the third wave. And then the fourth wave of Chinese migration is the more recent Chinese that have come to Samoa.
I think the big difference between the old Chinese and the new Chinese is the old Chinese were very respectful. They were a key part of Samoa's development. Whereas the new Chinese, they've come in, it's money for them.
I heard before Chinese Association, take care of this land.
Okay. You have lots of Samoan people coming to your Chinese restaurant?
I think 95% all Samoa.
I've tried many Samoan foods. I think I like every bit of it. Anything Samoa is something I like.
One of the main goals for this year is to try and set up an association that brings together the descendants of the first and the second and the third wave, as well as a new wave of Chinese migration. Bringing everyone together is the beginning of people having conversations about social issues, injustices, and also celebrating who we are. It's not just being part of the Samoan community, but also being Chinese.
All this geopolitical stuff, it's distracting us from what is our real problem, that is climate change. The fact that we are vulnerable to this. And whenever we have a disaster, a cyclone, an earthquake, it is these countries who run to our aid. That makes us vulnerable. And is that weakening our position? Of course it is. Of course it is.
Small island developing states have to take on debt to recover from disasters. This Chinese debt and the hype around it has really soured the political appetite to do that. I think if you tie the hands behind the back of a government or a people, then you're really limited on how you can develop.
With the geopolitics, the influx of foreign aid that's coming through to the country is not like how people has experienced before. Aid dependency is growing at an alarming rate amongst our people.
Climate change is a massive issue. We contribute the least to the causes of climate change, and yet we are at the forefront. Climate change is the biggest existential threat to the Pacific region.
I think there's got to be a new breed of leaders that will take on these challenges and still remain true to themselves as Pacific Islanders and not be bullied.
In the face of environmental issues,
we contribute the least to the causes of climate change, and yet we are at the forefront.
the island nations are resolute in confronting the challenges they face.
The solutions for our problems are within us. No one can come from the outside and solve those troubles. It must be solved from the inside.
Al Jazeera examines the resilience and determination of the Pacific nations, facing the critical role in shaping their destiny. Fight for the Pacific, rising tide, shifting powers, on Al Jazeera.
These are the glaciers of the White Mountain Range of Peru, some of the world's highest peaks. But growing up here, Saul Yuya has been watching them melt into Lake Palcacocha, now 34 times its original level.
When the river floods or there are avalanches, the lagoon overflows, and that could affect me and more than 50,000 people. Those of us who have contributed less to climate change are suffering more.
Experts say Peru's glaciers are doomed to disappear. 10 years ago, Saul filed a lawsuit against the German energy giant RWE, saying its emissions in Germany affect the glaciers here. But the company has never operated in Peru and denies responsibility. The judge's decision in Germany may win a tiny compensation for Huaraz. However, it may set a precedent to hold other huge emitters accountable for global warming.
Connecting communities.
And so there's this fear of failure because we've got to be bigger, badder, faster. Sometimes you need to go slower to go better.
Opening up the conversation.
There is more and more segregation. And the problem is that money is held by the privileged few, but there is also gatekeeping of knowledge.
With fresh perspectives from lesser heard voices.
The only way you bring about systemic change is you have to cause some kind of disruption.
The Stream explores the key issues of our times on Al Jazeera.
Protests and panic in Los Angeles after a second day of immigration raids by federal agents. I'm Kerry Johnston. This is Al Jazeera live from Doha. Also coming up, Israeli forces flatten homes and neighborhoods across Gaza, killing more than 70 people. Dozens are trapped under the rubble. Expectant mothers in Gaza face an increasing risk of losing their babies because of Israel's blockade on medical supplies. And All in Harmony, a musical program in Colombia that's proving life-changing for people with disabilities. There's been a second day of battles between riot police and protesters in America's second-largest city after military-style immigration raids. The targeting of workers in Los Angeles has created anger and fear. Police have fired tear gas and flashbangs at crowds On Friday, masked federal agents in armored vehicles detained dozens of people in a series of immigration sweeps. There have been more operations on Saturday. A top priority of the Trump administration is an overhaul of the U.S. immigration system. Our correspondent Rob Reynolds is in Los Angeles with more.
For several hours on Saturday, this South Los Angeles neighborhood has been the scene of a confrontation, at times violent, between Los Angeles County Police and protesters who are demanding an end to raids on workplaces by federal immigration agents who are seeking to round up undocumented aliens. The first confrontation started at a home repair warehouse where day laborers, many of whom are undocumented, gather to get jobs by the hour. ICE, or Immigration and Naturalization Service agents, raided that. They arrested a number of people. We saw them being taken away in a white bus with U.S. Marshals markings on the side. And then after that, hundreds of people showed up, more or less spontaneously, yelling at the police, demanding that they leave their neighborhood, demanding that they leave the undocumented migrants alone. People expressing to us a deep sense of outrage that this is happening in the place where they live, their own neighborhood. And you can see that there are police here now in quite large numbers, in riot gear, who have been gradually pushing the remaining demonstrators back out of the street. There have been helicopters flying overhead. However, it's become clear from the pronouncements from the Trump administration disregarding the protests of local officials, including the mayor of Los Angeles, Karen Bass, telling them essentially that it's none of their business and that the federal government is determined to carry out President Donald Trump's mandate to remove undocumented aliens from the United States, and they don't particularly care whether people here like it or not. Rob Reynolds, Al Jazeera, Compton, California.
Mark Christopher is an immigration attorney representing a number of people arrested by federal agents in several states. He explains how the Trump administration is trying to make it harder to represent detainees.
What we're seeing is just a massive increase in the amount of arrests and the amount of enforcement being done by Immigration and Customs Enforcement. What we're seeing is an increase in just the number of people. In the past, what we have seen is where immigration would focus on individuals who had maybe committed crimes or had been arrested or something of that nature. Now it's more indiscriminate. Even we're seeing people who are people arrested in schools, parents arrested in schools. And let me give you an example. I have a client of mine who was recently arrested by ICE. He happened to work at a farm. ICE had gone onto the farm seeking another individual, had happened to ask him about his immigration status, and then took him into custody. He had been here for a number of years, had family here in the United States, had no criminal record whatsoever, and he just seemed to be in the wrong place at the wrong time. And for us to get him a bond, to get him out, it took more than a month and a half that he was staying in custody at U.S. taxpayer expense. In most instances, you have the right to go in front of a federal immigration judge. At that point, you can then potentially request bond to get out and to fight your immigration case outside of being detained. For many, what we're seeing though, and what's changed, is that we're seeing that they are very, they being immigration, they're very reluctant to give bond. And so that makes it more difficult to present their legal case, because as an attorney, I'm now working with somebody who is detained. I have very limited access to them. It's much harder to present and to put together the case. In most cases, yes, you do have the chance to, the opportunity to contest it, although the current administration is making it much harder to do that.
Dozens of Palestinians are believed trapped under rubble after Israeli attacks on people seeking shelter across Gaza. Several strikes hit a building in Gaza City housing many members of one family. At least 16 were killed, including children. Civil defense teams are searching for 85 people said to be trapped in the debris. Across the Strip, Israeli strikes killed more than 70 Palestinians on Saturday. Ibrahim Al-Khalili reports from the site of airstrikes in Gaza City.
I'm now standing in a Sabra neighborhood in Gaza City, where the Israeli fighter jets have targeted this residential building behind me and flattened it down. As you can clearly see, many Palestinians have been confirmed killed and dozens were injured and transported to the nearest hospital. This is the aftermath of what the residents here are calling one of the deadliest attacks, as many Palestinians have been confirmed killed due to this brutality of the attack. In the light of the ongoing Israeli military's continuation of attacks targeting several areas across the Gaza Strip, and worth mentioning is that this is the second day of Eid where civilians should be celebrating the holy festivities that should be held, but they ended up being targeted and brutally killed.
The Israeli occupation targeted a residential building in the Al Sabra neighborhood without warning. It belonged to the Abu Sharia family. This is not the first building to be targeted since the beginning of Eid al-Adha. Several buildings have been hit, and these attacks have killed numerous civilians. This is truly a full-fledged massacre. No warning, no alert, a building full of civilians. A large number of people were inside the house at the time of the strike. Since the moment of the attack, rescue teams have been working on search and recovery operations. There are a number of people still trapped under the rubble of this building. Several children and women have been pulled out and transferred to hospitals.
As you can see, we are neighbors of the Abu Sharia family. May God hold the Israeli forces and Netanyahu accountable. There was no notice that a strike was going to happen here. If they had given any kind of warning, none of this would have happened. The Israelis are committing genocide. This is our home. Look at what happened to it. We evacuated wounded elderly people and young children.
We are living the second day of Eid, when children are supposed to be in amusement parks, gardens and parks.
They're using
carrying their toys and wearing Eid clothes.
people as human
However,
shield.
we are pulling our children out from under the rubble in torn
They should
pieces.
turn themselves
Eid clothes
in.
have become
The
the white
terrorists,
shroud,
this would not
and this
happen.
is due to the occupation.
The situation here is apocalyptic, and there are still many
separate
people
between
stuck under
the
the
militia
rubble. The
and
scale of devastation is
civilians.
unprecedented. We can
And
clearly
if
see
the
that
militia
buildings
people are
also have
together
been
with the civilians,
affected due to this
they
brutal
make
attack
the
that came
civilians
without
be
any
part of a militia,
prior
not
warning.
the opposite.
Ibrahim Al-Khalili, Al Jazeera,
So this is a
Gaza City,
horrible
Palestine.
Israeli forces have killed 8 Palestinians seeking food
Horrible
in southern
reality,
Gaza. The distribution center near Rafah is operated by the controversial US and Israeli-backed Gaza Humanitarian
Israel
Foundation.
did not want this.
The group says it
We're
could
trying
not
to
operate
prevent
on
this.
Saturday because of threats
Netanyahu
from
is a
Hamas.
bastard.
Hamas rejects the
There's an
accusations.
international agreement
Israeli
about
forces
that,
have
but
killed
this
at
is a
least
bigger problem than
118
this.
people
I
near the
can
foundation's
see
sites in less than 2 weeks.
over Netanyahu.
Lack of food and
Islamic
constant
Jihad is a
Israeli
bigger problem than
attacks mean expectant mothers are facing a greater risk of miscarriage and premature births. Israeli forces have prevented medical supplies such as iron
Israel
supplements and
forces
prenatal
this,
vitamins
Israel forces
from entering
that.
the Gaza Strip. Tariq Abba-Azul
It's
reports
like the
from Deir
network
al-Balah.
is designed against Israel. That's the purpose of the network.
In Gaza, the first cries of life are getting fainter.
Yeah, these
Some
are hard
never
videos.
come at all.
They're 24 hours.
The cost of starvation is now being measured in
I
lives that
agree.
ended before they even began.
Lately, we noticed increasing number of low birth weight babies, and most of them, the main cause was the malnutrition to their mothers. As everyone know that for the last 3 months in Gaza, there is no suitable nutrition are coming in Gaza. So the mothers here are suffering from severe malnutrition during their pregnancy, which leading to premature delivery as well as low birth weight to their babies.
And they need to
The Gaza
open a
Media Office
humanitarian
says more than
center
300 women lost
but
their
it's not going to
pregnancies
be
in
given
80
out by
days,
Hamas.
a direct result of hunger, trauma, and the total collapse of prenatal care.
It's a
forced
serious
by Israel's total
flaw in
blockade of
Israel's
the
war
Strip.
machine that they let this go on.
I
until
lost
now.
my baby because of malnutrition and the lack of proper food. Most days, all I had was bread, sometimes mixed with sand and canned goods. It wasn't enough to keep me or my baby healthy. Some days we had to skip meals entirely.
Doctors say many of these children will suffer lifelong complications if they survive at all. Malnutrition inside the womb has already robbed them of a healthy start to life. In Gaza, babies are dying before they learn to breathe. Mothers are burying them before they have names. And the siege meant to stop has become a death sentence for the unborn. Tariq Abazoum, Al Jazeera, Deir al-Balah, Palestine.
Dr. Brenda Kelly is a consultant obstetrician and subspecialist in maternal and fetal medicine at Oxford University Hospitals. She says Israel has created a lethal mix of conditions for pregnant mothers in Gaza.
Even before October of 23, we know that the ongoing blockade of Gaza had already compromised the health of many pregnant women who were already struggling with things like anemia in pregnancy. But what we're seeing now is a direct impact, a direct fallout of Israel's weaponizing of hunger in Gaza, impacting babies' growth. And growth restriction is one of the leading causes of miscarriage and stillbirth. But what I would say is that this is happening on top of the chronic severe stress and the psychological trauma, the lack of safe shelter, and that repeated displacement that we're seeing in Gaza. So that combined with the severe malnutrition that we're seeing creates this lethal mix of factors which will be behind the staggering rise in stillbirth and miscarriage and preterm birth and low birth weight. It's only going to get worse. There's no semblance of hope that Israel has any intention of lifting the blockade. And I think it's incumbent upon every nation outside Israel to hold them to account on this weaponizing of hunger. This is going to increase. And I suspect the numbers that we're hearing are very much an underrepresentation. We do not have the data collection within Gaza. We don't have the capacity to actually collect those data around miscarriage. And I will also just talk about that tragedy of the miscarriages. Many women are already so weakened by hunger. Experiencing a miscarriage is dreadful at the best of times, but when you actually are bleeding and in sort of very overcrowded circumstances without access to hygiene facilities, one cannot even begin to imagine how that feels for that grieving mother.
Israeli protesters are condemning the killing of Palestinian children in Gaza. Demonstrators held up pictures of dozens of children killed during Israel's war. Crowds gathered outside the Ministry of Defense and several other locations in Tel Aviv. They're calling for an immediate ceasefire and the release of captives still held in Gaza.
We are fully aware that what stands between us and getting all our loved ones back is Netanyahu's refusal to end the war. Mr. Witkoff, please, present Hamas and Netanyahu with an ultimatum to end the war. That is likely the only way to get our hostages back and save the state of Israel from complete destruction.
It's very frustrating because we're not getting our point across. Hostages are still there. The war unnecessarily is going on. It's a very painful position. And so I feel that I have to be here to voice my opposition to what this government is doing.
Tens of thousands of people have rallied in Italy's capital, Rome, demanding an immediate ceasefire in Gaza. Opposition parties organised a demonstration, accusing the government of remaining silent on the war. They say Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni's criticism of Israel hasn't been strong enough. Still ahead on Al Jazeera, Russian drone attacks on Ukraine's second biggest city. We hear from residents caught in the bombardment.
President Trump got the tariffs that he's dreamt about for years, but how will it affect America and the world? With renewed war in Gaza and instability spreading across the entire region, what are President Trump's true goals in the Middle East?
A quizzical look at U.S. politics, the bottom line.
African narratives from African perspectives. Short documentaries from African filmmakers from Mali and Gabon.
Je suis une Africaine 100% Afrique de l'Ouest.
Medini heritage and making her future. Africa Direct on Al Jazeera.
Getting close to the people most affected by those in power is often dangerous, but it's absolutely vital if the story is to be told.
Floods have subsided in this area.
We've pushed as far forward as we can to the front line now. The smell of death is overpowering. A lot of the stories that we cover are highly complex, so it's very important that we make them as understandable as we can to as many people as possible, no matter how much they know about a given crisis or issue. As Al Jazeera correspondents, that's what we strive to do.
You're watching Al Jazeera. Let's take a look at the headlines now. Protesters and police in Los Angeles are facing off for a second day. There's anger and fear over a series of military-style immigration raids targeting workers and day laborers in the city. Dozens of Palestinians are believed trapped under rubble after Israeli attacks on people seeking shelter across Gaza. An attack in Gaza City killed 16 people, including children. Israeli strikes killed more than 70 Palestinians on Saturday. And lack of food and constant Israeli attacks are increasing the risk of miscarriage and premature birth among expectant mothers in Gaza. Health officials are warning that the lives of at least 50,000 pregnant and nursing women are at risk. Ukraine's president says his country will not yield to pressure after Russian forces carried out strikes on the northeastern city of Kharkiv. More than 40 explosions were reported in 90 minutes in the first wave. Kharkiv's mayor says that airstrikes killed at least 4 people and injured 38. In the southern city of Kherson, authorities say 2 people were killed in an attack on a residential building.
I was here and my daughter was in the next room. I didn't even hear an explosion, just a click. When I opened the door, there was dust everywhere.
The drones were buzzing closer and closer, and finally, when the sound was right over our house, we took our dog and cats and hid behind the wall in the corridor. We sat down on the floor and then it hit.
We must not weaken any form of pressure on Russia, neither the formats already applied nor the methods of pressure being prepared. The Russians are preparing to continue the war, ignoring all peace proposals. They must be held accountable for this.
Ukraine's security service has released new video reportedly showing its drone attacks on Russian air bases last Sunday. Several planes are seen burning in Belaya in southern Russia. Last week's attack reportedly destroyed 10% of Russia's strategic bombers, according to some estimates. Iran has rejected accusations by the UN nuclear watchdog that it's not meeting its obligations under an international agreement. An IAEA report released last week found Iran has produced a record amount of near-weapons-grade enriched uranium. It characterized the findings as a serious concern. Tehran maintains its nuclear program is for peaceful purposes. And Iran says its intelligence services have collected thousands of sensitive documents related to the Israeli government. According to Iranian news reports, the documents were obtained some time ago and include data on Israel's nuclear projects and facilities. The reports say Iran obtained the documents in a covert operation. The documents are said to include videos and images. Tawhid Asadi has more for us now from Tehran.
This is coming out, it grasps a huge amount of attention inside Iran, and Iranians are, in this report, putting focus on the fact that this so-called operation has been conducted from the inside of the Israeli territories, showing sort of they're trying in a sense to flex their muscles in terms of their counter-espionage capabilities. And also that happens within the context of escalations rhetorically between the two sides. The Israelis have time and again threatened Iranians for a possible attack on Iranian nuclear facilities. And of course, such kind of report is going to go beyond that extent, put a certain amount of impact on Iran's diplomatic engagements, including the talks that are ongoing between Iran and the United States, a next round of which is expected. That's what we know for about that so far. But one last point that I wanted to add is that it's almost similar to an operation that took place back in 2018 when Mossad, the Israeli intelligence service, said that it has conducted an operation inside Iran, taking hundreds of kilograms of documents regarding Iran's nuclear capabilities and Iran's nuclear facilities in that regard. So that could be also taken into consideration as a tit-for-tat action from the Iranians.
Donald Trump is warning his one-time ally and friend Elon Musk of very serious consequences if Musk decides to fund the US president's political rivals. The two men had a very public falling out last week on social media. On Thursday, Musk referred to Trump's budget bill before Congress as an abomination. The president responded by saying Musk was crazy. Shihab Ritansi has more now from Washington, D.C.
The social media feud between Donald Trump and Elon Musk has abated, but Donald Trump did issue a warning to Musk on traditional news media here in the United States. He was asked what would happen if Musk funded Democratic candidates against Republicans who voted in favor of Donald Trump's big, beautiful bill in Congress. And Trump responded, if he does, he'll have to pay the consequences for that. He didn't say what the consequences would be, but he did repeat he'll have to pay very serious consequences if he does that. He also said that he had no desire to repair his relationship with Musk, nor to speak with Musk, and also asked whether Trump had given any further thought to cancelling government contracts with Musk's companies. Trump replied, I'd be allowed to do that, but I haven't given it any thought. So a clear warning there to Musk at a time when Musk appears to have retreated somewhat. He's even deleted some of the inflammatory tweets from Thursday. And there's much the government could do in retaliation to Musk. It could reassert the regulatory framework that Musk succeeded in dismantling while he was at the Department of Government Efficiency. It could cancel government contracts. That would have a cost for the government too, but it would destroy potentially Elon Musk's companies. And a very interesting avenue, which has been discussed quite widely now in Republican circles, is the government could investigate Musk's immigration status at a time when the Trump administration is making mass deportations a great priority. It's long been rumored that Musk did not tell the truth when he first applied for residency in the United States. Were that found to be true, he could be deported. Shihab Ritansi, Al Jazeera, Washington.
Now, an innovative program in Colombia is breaking barriers and transforming perceptions of young adults with Down syndrome, severe autism, and other cognitive challenges. Alessandra Rampietti has more on how Medellin's Philharmonic Orchestra is showcasing their musical talents.
At Medellin's Philharmonic, talent knows no limits. For the past 8 years, the orchestra has welcomed aspiring musicians with Down syndrome and other intellectual disabilities. Like Kelly Montoya, who says the program gave her confidence and helped her overcome discrimination.
It's really hard for society to accept someone like me. I've been through so much. People judge you for the smallest things. I was bullied since I was little, and that left a mark. But I really like how the Philharmonic includes us, letting us feel useful, respected, and not judged.
Advanced members perform in public concerts with the orchestra twice a year. And everyone joins open rehearsals that offer both musical training and community. Teachers say the goal is to support adults with disabilities and their families who are often left out.
There are programs for kids, but once they reach adolescence or adulthood, those opportunities disappear. They will need these spaces to grow.
For these students, these rehearsals go beyond the music. Therapists say that singing and playing activates both sides of the brain, helping their focus, coordination, and social skills, no matter the diagnosis.
Music is not a verbal language. It's open and accessible to everyone. Even if we don't speak or have difficulty speaking or struggle to connect with others, music is a space where we'll always be able to communicate.
Affected by mild schizophrenia and cognitive impairment, 33-year-old Jenny Baena says the program has been life-changing.
It transformed me because often we forget to look inward to see what we need to express. There are so many things pulling our attention away, but these spaces help us reflect, see what's within us, and figure out what can support us so that we can then give to others.
Sentiments shared by her mother Lysiria, she says the program opened up Jenny's life and left them feeling less isolated.
It's helped her mental health. She's calmer, more relaxed. Now she socializes with people her age, doesn't isolate, and she's much happier. These young people give you something incredible given the chance. They make you a better human being.
A quiet revolution, one note at a time, proving that opportunities and talent speak louder than disabilities. Alessandro Ampietti, Al Jazeera, Medellin.
And you can find more information on our website. Just head to aljazeera.com. The weather is next, then Inside Story looks at what's behind the very public feud between US President Donald Trump and tech billionaire Elon Musk. Stay with us here on Al Jazeera, and thanks very much indeed for watching.
Hey, there are no highest level alerts to speak about across India for these monsoon rains that we're dealing with. So lightish rain up and down that west coast there. You've got a burst of rain in Tamil Nadu, not too far away from Chennai, but not as active as it has been. It is active, though, for the Philippines. Up and down the country here, we've got severe flood advisories in play, and potentially we could see a tropical storm or even a typhoon just to the east of the Philippines over the next little bit. That's something we're going to watch. Usual showers and storms, monsoon downpours across Indochina. And for China, our seasonal summer rains running across the Yangtze River Valley here. The darker the color, the more intense that rain is falling. But this is going to pour into southern Japan. So places like Kagoshima could see a couple 100 millimeters of rain over the next little bit. Not out of the usual or the ordinary. June is the wettest month of the year for Kagoshima. For this part of Southeast Asia, rain will be steady along the top end of Sumatra Island. Not too bad for Java Island, especially East Java Province. Jakarta with a high of 31 degrees. And we'll end this weather report in Pakistan. Up and down the country, temperatures are in the 40s with the exception of Karachi at 35 degrees on Sunday. Bye for now.
The Golan Heights, under illegal occupation since the 1967 Arab-Israeli War. Now, a group of Syrian farmers is resisting encroachment on their land by Israeli wind power turbines.
There is a plan to uproot us from our land and homes.
Al Jazeera World follows their campaign, which is a struggle not just for land, but for sovereignty and survival. The Golan, a battle for power on Al Jazeera.
From mutual admiration to a fierce public blow-up, the short-lived alliance between Donald Trump and Elon Musk appears to have come to a dramatic end. The two men have been trading accusations, threats, and insults. What's behind the breakup, and why does it matter? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the programme. I'm Elizabeth Puranam. The big breakup. The President of the United States, Donald Trump, has parted ways with the richest man in the world, billionaire entrepreneur Elon Musk. Once their friendship reaped rewards for both, Musk donated around hundreds of millions of dollars to Trump's re-election campaign, and the president created a role for Musk in his government. But political or fiscal differences soured the relationship, and what was once a mutually beneficial alliance deteriorated into an exchange of insults on social media. So did Elon Musk's position undermine America's democracy? Can we expect more short-term White House posts for donors? And do Donald Trump's friendships and interests influence U.S. policy, both foreign and domestic? We'll put these questions and more to our guests shortly, but first, Imogen Kimber tells us how we got here.
Come on up here, Elon.
But first, there was mutual admiration between these two wealthy and powerful men, US President Donald Trump and tech billionaire Elon Musk.
Take over, Elon, yes, take over.
Musk spent more than $250 million on Trump's 2024 election campaign.
I'm politically active now because I think the future of America and the future of civilization is at stake.
Then, when Trump returned to the Oval Office, he created DOGE, the Department of Governmental Efficiency, and put Musk in charge of reducing public spending. Before long, cracks began to show in their mutually beneficial relationship. But when Musk's stint as a special White House advisor came to an end, the pair promised to remain friends.
Honored to be with Elon, who's my friend, and he's done a fantastic job. He didn't need this. He didn't need it. And we find out government's a little nasty on occasion.
I expect to remain a friend and an advisor, and certainly if there's anything the president wants me to do, I'm at the president's service.
However, the businessman increased his criticism of Trump's budget proposal known as One Big Beautiful Bill, saying the additional spending and tax cuts would increase the national deficit, pushing the US into a recession. The president maintained what Musk was really annoyed about was the bill's plan to slash Biden-era subsidies for electric vehicles, which had helped grow Musk's company Tesla. Then things exploded on social media. On his Truth Social platform, the president threatened to cancel Musk's government contracts, prompting Tesla stocks to plunge 14%, knocking more than $152 billion off the company's market value. Musk hit back, suggesting he could decommission the Dragon spacecraft that NASA relies on to take astronauts and supplies to the International Space Station. He later rescinded the threat. So with billions of dollars and government programs at stake, whether this fiery row intensifies or fizzles out, it will likely have repercussions far greater than the Trump-Musk friendship circle.
Honestly, I've been so busy working on China, working on Russia, working on Iran, working on so many that I'm not thinking about Elon.
Imogen Kimber, Al Jazeera for Inside Story.
Well, let's bring in our guests. Joining us from Washington, D.C. is Niall Stanage, political analyst and White House columnist for The Hill newspaper. In New York is Dan Ives, a technology analyst and managing director of Wedbush Securities. And also in Washington, D.C. is Fez Siddiqui, a technology reporter at The Washington Post and the author of Hubris Maximus, the shattering of Elon Musk. A very warm welcome to all of you. Niall, I'll start with you in Washington, D.C. Why do you think Elon Musk has decided to pick this fight now? Does he feel so strongly about government spending?
It's possible that he does. That's his claim. And of course, the ostensible purpose of DOGE was to cut back on spending quite radically. This legislation that he is objecting to is forecast to increase the deficits by $2.4 trillion over a decade. So look, there is legitimate grounds for fiscal conservatives to complain about it. It is also completely valid to raise Mr. Musk's personal interest in Tesla selling a lot of cars and the effects that cutting back on electrical vehicle subsidies might have upon that. In a bigger picture, Elizabeth, just briefly, I mean, this is not very surprising. You think about what traits characterize Donald Trump, and you think of thin-skinnedness, volatility, egotism. You think of Elon Musk, and you think of thin-skinnedness, volatility, and egotism. So it is not a surprise that these two rather narcissistic and powerful men have clashed.
Yeah, I don't think anyone is surprised, and it will be really interesting to see if they're able to make up or if the differences remain, and of course what impact it will have on the world's richest man and his businesses, and also on US government. Dan, Trump said that Musk knew the bill, the domestic agenda tax and spending bill, better than anyone, and only had a problem when he found out that electric vehicles, that they were going to cut the EV mandate. Is there any truth to that, do you think?
I disagree. I mean, with that assertion, I think, look, Musk knew from the beginning that that was ultimately going to be in the bill. I think that was well known across Wall Street. I think part of it, kind of like Niall talked about, I think Musk got more and more frustrated because of the spending in the bill. There have been other issues, space programs, some of the appointments there that have bubbled up. And Musk, look, he put his reputation on the line. Think about all the brand issues with Tesla and Doge. That's why, these two have gone from BFFs to frenemies, almost like a junior high school fight.
Fez, Dan's talking about how Musk put his reputation on the line. Certainly, we saw his reputation suffer with some of Tesla's traditional buyers when he threw his weight behind Trump. The people who buy electric cars on the coasts of America. Do you think that his scorched earth attacks on Trump's sweeping tax and spending agenda, do you think that they pose a threat to the bill at all?
This is the major test. So Musk managed to rally a group of very powerful people behind Trump, behind the opposition of a spending bill earlier this year, and managed to essentially take a bill that looked well on its way to passage out to pasture. And that was a true sign of Musk's political power. Does he still wield that same amount of power? I think we're going to learn if there's been a referendum against the massive amount of power that Musk has attained in Washington.
Now, do you think that Musk's criticism would encourage others or give others, even within the establishment, courage to do the same? Can you see it having that impact?
Words you used in that question, Elizabeth, were the establishment, because I don't actually think that's where Elon Musk is strongest. Mm-hmm. In brief, this goes to the current break or change that we're seeing in the Republican Party and conservatism in America more generally. I think office holders in the Republican Party, if forced to choose between Trump and Musk, will overwhelmingly choose Trump, very much so. And there's a lot of exasperation on Capitol Hill with Elon Musk. But, and here's an important point, Elon Musk has a very, very clear channel of communication with the online right, by which I mean partly influencers and partly a broader constituency of younger, culturally right-wing, they might not even call themselves conservatives, right-wing populists perhaps. That is an important part of the Trump base. And Elon Musk, in terms of being a voice of dissent, does have real capacity to cause Trump problems there, to muddy Trump up with those people. That, I think, is a different question than with the quote-unquote establishment, which Trump has basically put into a much more tight grip of his own these days.
Yeah, Dan, with the so-called establishment, those within the Trump administration, Musk had scrapped with Trump's top trade advisor, Pete Navarro, and Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent as well. Do you think that he had worn out his welcome in the administration's power centers?
Well, look, it comes down to Trump needed Musk, just like Musk needed Trump. And I think when you look at Navarro and some of the other issues that have happened there, Musk has significant power. And he also has his pulse in terms of what's happened in China, as well as supply chain and what tariffs mean. So I would actually view it differently. I mean, yeah, worn out to welcome, but I'd say ultimately Musk just got more and more frustrated. And as a CEO of Tesla and focused on SpaceX and all of his other initiatives, he had to leave because of the brand issues related to Trump and Doge. So I think it was a two-way street. But it comes down to, especially when it comes to midterm elections, Republicans need Trump, but they also need Musk.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point that you're making. Fez, how much influence do you think Musk still wields with Republicans because of his enormous personal fortune and also his ownership of, perhaps the most preeminent social media platform for politics, X, especially in light of those midterm elections coming up halfway through next year?
Yeah, Musk has demonstrated that he is essentially a kingmaker. One of his lines of attack on Trump was, without me, Trump wouldn't have won the 2024 election. And that rang true for so many people across the spectrum. 275 million or north of $275 million toward putting Trump and other Republicans in office. That is nothing to sneeze at. And as soon as Musk, wields this massive megaphone that he has in X against any candidate, he can make their life a living hell.
And yet, Niall, he wasn't able to do that recently with the Wisconsin, I believe, Supreme Court race, right? And so he does obviously have enormous power, but it can't be used to the effect that he wants every time.
That's right. And this goes to a long-established fact in American politics, which is that on the one hand, money is extremely important. You have to have a certain amount of finance to be viable. But money does not guarantee victory in elections. And there's been all sorts of candidates in history who have spent large amounts of their personal fortune to try to get themselves elected and have failed. So on the one hand, yes, that massive amount of money, well over $250 million that Elon Musk spent last year on the election of Trump primarily. Yes, of course, that's important. You're better having $250 million backing you than not, or than going against you. But you mentioned the Wisconsin Supreme Court race where he and allied groups put a lot of money behind the conservative candidate to be on the Wisconsin Supreme Court, and that candidate lost by a fairly significant margin to the Liberal candidate. Relatedly, as it pertains to the specifics of Musk, it is perhaps worth emphasizing, Elizabeth, that opinion polls consistently show him even less popular than Trump. And of course, Trump's a very divisive figure. In the general population, Elon Musk is pretty widely disliked. His approval ratings with women in particular are pretty disastrous. And so he can have negative impacts, even as he has been able to put this enormous capital into the service of Republican and conservative candidates, none more famously than the case of President Trump.
And again, Dan, we've seen that how Musk behaves has an impact on his companies, especially Tesla, perhaps the most profitable. Why is he deciding to go up against the US president when his companies rely on government contracts and subsidies? How damaging could this be for Musk?
Look, and Fez knows as well, but the reality is that NASA relies on SpaceX. So let's just be clear. You could threaten contracts. There's a better chance of me playing the NBA than them cutting SpaceX because they need space. There's no choice. SpaceX is ultimately the foundation of the U.S. space program. So when you look at everything going on,
sure, they need SpaceX, and there's been, the two, Musk and Trump, have been attacking each other over Musk threatening to not use his Dragon capsule to send astronauts to and from the International Space Station. But doesn't Musk need the government more, around regulations for Tesla, for self-driving cars and artificial intelligence?
Yeah, and look, no doubt, we've said you don't want Trump to go from a friend or a BFF to an enemy. From a regulatory, autonomous in terms of the roadmap, And that's why cooler heads need to prevail. In other words, these two in the sandbox, the play date needs to be back on. I do believe behind closed doors, it will start to get worked out. But it speaks why Tesla was down so much. You cannot have Trump as an enemy of Musk and Tesla.
Fez, how do you see this feud and the impact that it will have on Musk's companies, or might have, depending on whether they're able to patch things up or not? And why do you think this was something worth doing for Musk, having a fallout with the US president?
I'll take the first question first, if you don't mind. Musk has shown a propensity to have just a very high tolerance for risk. Investors know, even the biggest bulls know, that Musk is not always, he won't appear to compromise his principles just to gain a dollar at the end of the day. And if you look at Tesla investors, I mean, these are the folks who are in the lurch throughout this whole ride. I mean, Tesla spiked on the news of Musk having a close relationship with the president. Tesla faced all of this blowback from Musk's close relationship with the president and from Doge. The stock tanked. Musk had ultimately to return his attention to the business, and then he picks a feud with the president. So you might be sitting here and thinking, as many are, you know, what is the strategy here? How is this good for Tesla? And what must the Tesla investors who are just completely caught in the lurch, what must they be feeling? That is not how Musk thinks. He has a very high tolerance for risk. And if he believes in the principle, regardless of how you might feel about the man or the principle itself, he will be vocal about it.
Niall, you can have an extremely high tolerance for risk, but then dealing with the president of the United States, especially this one, I mean, that's a whole another kettle of fish, isn't it?
Mm. Oh,
and
certainly.
Especially one that has, that is not shy of using federal agencies against his opponents.
Well, exactly. That's what I was just about to say. We have a president right now who is uncommonly prone to use the levers of the federal government to try to exact vengeance on his enemies. And we have seen that in the case of law firms. We've seen it in relation to FBI agents who investigated the Capitol riot on January the 6th. We have seen it in relation to universities and so on and so forth. In relation to Elon Musk and the risks involved, it is worth also, I think, getting back to what might be considered the more critical or anti-Musk interpretation of what has happened here with Trump, not just in the past week, but over the past few months. In a certain sense, you know, what Elon Musk did last year with all that money isn't all that uncommon. He bought himself a position of power and influence. He, having spent all that money to get Donald Trump elected, was placed at the heart of government, albeit in this sort of quasi-official role. And much of Doge's work, in effect, hollowed out the departments that either were or could have regulated Musk's companies or scrutinized Musk's companies. So he bought access and influence and got what he paid for to a large extent. Now he is apparently raising objection to the spending bill. Trump says he's actually objecting to the elimination or erosion of business incentives to buy Teslas. But while Musk is a one-off figure, the pattern here is not all that unique. Rich people buying political influence is a trend that we have seen, sadly, for particularly in recent decades here in the United States.
And Dan, perhaps we've never seen it as much as we are right now, right, with this Trump administration's relationship with extreme wealth and corporate power. Do you think that what we're seeing between Trump and Musk, that it could lead to a fraying of that union, or is this just between these two men?
No, I mean, it's spread out. I mean, think about it, you go back to inauguration, every big tech CEO is in the room. I mean, a lot of senators were in the overflow room. But then you look at China. China, in terms of the tariffs and what's happening there, that's the hearts and lungs of U.S. tech. That's not something that was ever on the table going into, I think going into inauguration, even the beginning, that big tech CEOs thought. You will continue to see tension. You've seen tension with Jensen from NVIDIA, Cook in terms of Apple, obviously Musk, and it's going to continue. Yeah, so I don't view this as, everyone's holding hands, smiling.
And Fez is picking up on what Dan said and how he sees it. Do you think that it's necessarily, like, is it a good or a bad thing if it sheds light on that relationship between the US government and with, big tech, extreme wealth?
Yeah, I mean, this is a post, Citizens United reality in the United States. There's obviously a massive amount of entrenched power in Silicon Valley, similar to other power centers in the United States. I mean, New York being one of them. But if you look at tech itself, I mean, Musk has basically given these tech entrepreneurs a roadmap for how you influence policy in Washington. And it's not some sort of like the Musk playbook is not some indirect, nuanced influence operation. He took over, as one of your guests point out, in this quasi-official capacity, a large part of the federal government.
Yeah, and Niall, coming back to a point that you were making earlier about the amount of money that Musk spent, and you think that he pretty much got his money's worth, but when it comes to that quasi role as the head of the Department of Government Efficiency or DOGE, do you think that Musk was something of a fall guy for that agency and all of its troubles and criticisms? He did take a lot of the heat on DOGE. He said that there's cut around $2 trillion. That never happened.
I think if you polled political insiders in Washington, they would agree with the supposition in your question. I am not, in fact, myself, particularly persuaded by that argument. I get the argument, which is that the criticism is focused on Musk when it might otherwise have been focused on Trump. I am just unpersuaded that Musk's role thereby alleviates pressure on Trump. I think Musk's controversial nature, I think his unpopularity in many quarters, in fact, becomes part of a anti-Trump or Trump-critical narrative, not just from liberals or people on the left, but from people in the center ground who are worried about a kind of rashness or a lack of thought or an overly crude approach to government reform and to governing generally. It is true that lots of people think that the government is bloated or that there is wasteful spending within it. I think that's absolutely the case. But because Musk himself is such an abrasive character, I think that in fact, is a political problem for Trump. I don't really think that somehow redirects or diverts negative attention away from Trump.
And Dan, just how much of a political problem do you think that could be for Trump, especially given that Musk owns X? He has used his control of its moderation policies, its algorithm to boost his own posts, at times silence his critics. He has been effective at that, hasn't he? Could we see him now using that against Trump?
That's the danger. I mean, that's why Johnson, met with Musk. If Republicans have Musk against them and against Trump, that would be a disaster for midterm elections. So the reality is that they can say what they want. They need Musk in their corner. Musk need Trump in his corner. And I think that's why. I mean, they will be friends again, but cooler heads need to prevail. No one benefits, Trump or Musk, at this tension.
Fez, do you think that cooler heads will prevail? Dan is talking about how Republicans do need Musk. Musk needs Trump. At the moment, Musk doesn't have Trump. I mean, who could this be more damaging for?
So on whether I think, there will be a détente or, reunion between these two folks even, in my observation, they are both people who obviously, can spar, can get down into the mud, but then, they can have a short memory if it serves them. And Musk has experience dealing with politicians who are hostile to his businesses or his agenda. Obviously, he is one of the nation's most foremost conservative donors at this point, but he spent his career operating in California, one of the country's most liberal states. So he has that ability to be pragmatic and to see past it all when it's, the right thing for his companies or his interests. Who has more to lose? I mean, it's got to be for me, but, I make this prediction with hesitance as a non-political analyst, but I would think it would be the business person here. I talked to somebody who, a Tesla investor who was like, Musk has no idea what he's going up against. He's going against the power of the presidency of the United States. And he points out that Trump will only be president for 3.5 more years. Well, that is
he said he'll be around for decades. Niall, in 30
term.
seconds, do you think that Musk thinks he is more powerful than Trump?
I think Musk probably thinks he's more powerful than anyone. Whether he's right or not is the question. But in the 15 of my 30 seconds that are left, I just think this is a bit of a Cold War scenario. There's a mutually assured destruction or damage if they keep going at each other. Each has the capacity to hurt the other. So that may help there be some kind of détente or uneasy truce.
All right, that is our discussion today. Thank you all. That is Niall Standage in Washington, D.C., Dan Ives in New York, and Fez Siddiqui in Washington, D.C. And thank you, too, for watching. You can see the programme again anytime by visiting our website, aljazeera.com. And for further discussion, do go to our Facebook page. That's facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. You can also join the conversation on X. Our handle is @AJ Inside Story. From me, Elizabeth Puranam, and the whole team here. Bye for now.
June on Al Jazeera.
G7 leaders meet in Canada. As US policy shifts raise urgent questions, can they find common ground?
New conversations, new perspectives. Reframe explores the state of human rights and democracy today.
A global contest like never before. 32 clubs from 6 continents converge for a new chapter in world football. The FIFA Club World Cup begins.
The Bottom Line dives into US politics and policies and their global impact.
President Vladimir Putin is set to attend Russia's economic forum. With mounting challenges and the war in Ukraine dragging on, will he address the deepening cracks in his country's economy?
June on Al Jazeera.
On Counting the Cost, India's growth has recently outpaced forecasts. Will it become an economic superpower? Will Latin America pick sides in the trade war between the US and China? Plus, why the OPEC Plus alliance is pumping more oil into the market. Counting the Cost on Al Jazeera.
The land of the free.
America's never been a real democracy. The black people have never experienced that.
Democracy Maybe explores divisions and struggles in America's electoral system. A fight for and against equal representation and the democratic process.
It's a country that's learning how to be a democracy, but it's not there yet.
One person, one vote on Al Jazeera.
Al Jazeera, wherever you are.
I'm Kerry Johnston in Doha. The top stories now on Al Jazeera. There's been a second day of battles between riot police and protesters in America's second largest city after military-style immigration raids. The targeting of workers in Los Angeles has created anger and fear. Police have fired tear gas and flashbang grenades Masked federal agents in armored vehicles have detained dozens of people in a series of raids that continue on Saturday. An overhaul of the U.S. immigration system is a top priority of the Trump administration. The White House's top border advisor, Tom Homan, says the National Guard will be deployed to respond to the protests. California's Governor Gavin Newsom has posted on social media saying the federal government is moving to take over the California National Guard and deploy 2,000 soldiers. That move is purposefully inflammatory and will only escalate tensions. This is the wrong mission and will erode public trust. US President Donald Trump has posted to Truth Social saying the federal government will step in and solve the problem of riots and looters the way it should be solved. There have also been protests in New York against the immigration crackdown. A number of protesters were detained and injured in the rally. New York also saw immigration raids on Friday. 2 men were arrested by agents in civilian clothes in the hallways of a courthouse as they tried to attend an immigration hearing. Dozens of Palestinians are believed trapped under rubble after Israeli attacks on people seeking shelter across Gaza. Several strikes hit a building in Gaza City, housing many members of one family. At least 16 were killed, including children. Civil defense teams are searching for 85 people said to be trapped in the debris. Across the Strip, Israeli strikes killed more than 70 Palestinians on Saturday. Israeli protesters are condemning the killing of Palestinian children in Gaza. Demonstrators held up pictures of dozens of children killed during Israel's war. Crowds gathered outside the Ministry of Defense and several other locations in Tel Aviv. They're calling for an immediate ceasefire and the release of captives still held in Gaza. Tens of thousands of people have rallied in Italy's capital, Rome, demanding an immediate ceasefire in Gaza. Opposition parties organised a demonstration, accusing the government of remaining silent on the war. They say Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni's criticism of Israel hasn't been strong enough. Ukraine's president says his country will not yield to pressure after Russian forces carried out strikes on the northeastern city of Kharkiv. More than 40 explosions were reported in 90 minutes in the first wave. Kharkiv's mayor says the airstrikes killed at least 4 people and injured 38. In the southern city of Kherson, authorities say 2 people were killed in an attack on a residential building.
We must not weaken any form of pressure on Russia, neither the formats already applied nor the methods of pressure being prepared. The Russians are preparing to continue the war, ignoring all peace proposals. They must be held accountable for this.
Governor of Russia Tula region says Ukraine's forces have targeted a chemical plant there. 2 people were injured. No contamination has been detected. A Colombian senator and opposition presidential candidate has been shot while hosting a campaign event in Bogota. Officials say Miguel Uribe Turbay was shot in the back at a park on Saturday. He's reportedly in a serious condition. The 39-year-old is a member of the Conservative Democratic Center Party. The government has condemned the attack. And Iran has rejected accusations by the UN nuclear watchdog that it's not meeting its obligations under an international agreement. An IAEA report released last week found Iran has produced a record amount of near-weapons-grade enriched uranium. It characterized the findings as a serious concern. Those are the headlines. News continues here on Al Jazeera after the bottom line.
Hi, I'm Steve Clements, and I have a couple of questions. Under pressure from the U.S., Russia and Ukraine are finally sitting down and talking. But are the two sides getting closer? And how much is political theatrics? Let's get to the bottom line. U.S. President Donald Trump has made peacemaking between Russia and Ukraine one of his top priorities. But progress has been harder than he thought. Ukrainian leaders say they want their country to exist as an independent, sovereign state. Russian leaders argue that they need territory and other guarantees to make sure Ukraine can't be used as a Western threat against their country. Both sides have agreed to talk to each other to avoid angering the White House, but at the same time, they continue to rain missiles, bombs, and drone attacks on each other. President Trump has accused both sides of intransigence as they escalate the military attacks on each other. So what are the prospects for a real peace deal, or even a ceasefire? And what is Russia's vision of success right now? What does it hope to achieve with Ukraine and beyond in the region? Today we're talking with Angela Stent, former U.S. State Department official and currently the Director Emerita of the Center for Eurasian, Russian, and East European Studies at Georgetown University. And she's author of Putin's World, Russia Against the West and With the Rest. And Andrei Kortunov, the former Director General of the Russian International Affairs Council in Moscow. Thank you both for joining me. Let me start with you, Andrei. You and I have talked before about this conflict. You kind of framed it in a way that sort of looked at this as one of the after effects of the end of the Cold War. I'm interested right now in how you see the tilt of this conflict and Russia's place in the world. What is Russia's vision for itself, and is it winning?
Well, I think that we should not underestimate the centrality of this conflict for the Russian leadership and for Vladimir Putin in person. It is not just another foreign policy issue. It is the foreign policy issue. It's a matter of very high concern, and everything else is subordinated to this key issue. I think the perception is that Russia is winning, maybe not as fast as the Russian leadership has expected, but Russia is prevailing. And ultimately, Ukraine will have to accept most of the Russian conditions for a peace settlement. Moreover, the perception is that the West at large will have to accept the majority of Russian demands on the new European security architecture. It does mean that Vladimir Putin is not ready to negotiate some de-escalation or even ceasefires, but his basic demands remain the same as they were more than 3 years ago.
Do you think, Andrei, that Putin is succeeding in dividing NATO and weakening NATO, or with Sweden joining, with Finland joining, has a lot of what Putin launched backfired when it comes to the security situation as he sees it from Moscow?
Well, I think that it is too early to say that there is a real split within NATO. And I think that there are concerns that Donald Trump at some point might change his mind. He might get tired of this conflict. His patience might run thin. And of course, Donald Trump has to face a lot of pressure, not just from his allies in Europe, but also from the Capitol Hill and maybe even from within his own administration. So there are concerns that Donald Trump might change his position, and the United States will continue to support Ukraine, maybe not at the level at which this support was rendered to Kyiv by the Biden administration, but still the United States might shoulder the Ukrainian military might. However, for the time being, of course, the U.S. administration is perceived as an opportunity, potentially as a game changer, and definitely the Russian leadership is very interested in maintaining positive, constructive relations with Washington, D.C., not just on the Ukrainian issue, but beyond the Ukrainian issue as well. That's why they are so focused on restoring the diplomatic relations with the United States, and they offer some potential economic deals to the United States. the idea is to make sure that it's not just Ukraine, but the political investment portfolio in this relationship will be diversified.
Angela, let me ask you about, from your perspective, and, you've met Vladimir Putin, you've kind of looked at Russia for decades, and I'm just interested as you sort of look at what you think is the grand strategy of Russia towards the West and the rest.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know, does it seem like they're getting a tilt in their favor right now?
So I think the ultimate grand strategy is to undo the post-Cold War settlement. And President Putin, again, has repeated the fact that he doesn't believe that the breakup of the Soviet Union was legal. It was wrong. And there are people around him who really think that that's their ultimate aim. And if you look at the treaties that they presented to NATO and the United States in December of 2021, they were basically calling for the rollback of NATO to where it was before the first enlargement. So that is certainly the ultimate grand strategy.
You're saying that's the North Star.
That's the North Star. I mean, that's the ultimate grand strategy, is to just roll back the entire post-Cold War settlement. And that's why they're at war with Ukraine now, and that they've been trying to undermine governments in a number of the other post-Soviet states and have more pro-Russian governments there. So that's the ultimate aim. I think the intermediate aim, clearly, is to subordinate Ukraine, is to have a rump Ukraine to effect regime change there, and a Ukraine that will not look west. Because as we know, as Putin wrote in his 5,000-word essay the summer before the invasion began, he does not consider that Ukrainians are a separate nationality, that Ukraine is a separate country.
He was very overt about what he was going to do and what his intentions were.
I mean,
we kept asking, what's Putin doing? And he wrote it down.
I mean, I published a piece just before the invasion. It was clear to me then, and to a number of other Russia watchers, that this was going to happen, because he didn't disguise his goals there.
You were a Russian intelligence officer for the United States, I think in the National Intelligence Council. Essentially for our viewers, that's like the top CIA job, watching Russia. If you were the top Russia watcher for the president of the Czech Republic or Poland or Romania, would you tell them that they ought to be nervous?
I certainly would. I mean, I don't think anything is imminent, but I think we know, again, what the ultimate goals are. So, and I think they are nervous, particularly if you talk about Poland or the Czech Republic, where, there are also acts of sabotage that have been carried out over the European continent in the last years that emanate from Russia. So, yes, they should be nervous.
I often think that offshore perspectives of each other sometimes offer a little more glimpse of how the world really sees this. And I'd love to ask Andre, how, Andre, do you see Donald Trump right now? How do you see the United States? Do you see the United States as a formidable rival and adversary? Do you see the United States as a burgeoning new friend? Do you see Donald Trump as a buddy of Vladimir Putin? From your perspective, what are the dimensions, particularly in a strategic frame, of how you see the U.S. from Moscow today?
If I might just very briefly comment on what Angela has just said. If you look at the current situation from the Kremlin, you would argue that the Russian foreign policy has never been revisionist, but has always been defensive. The message from the Kremlin is that from the very outset, after the disintegration of the Soviet Union, Russia tried to get integrated into the Western community of nations. We tried to be nice and to basically respect all the interests of the Western community. However, we were denied this access. We were not treated as an equal partner. And basically, what we do is just a reaction to the perceived aggression from the West, to the NATO enlargement, to the interference of the United States and its European allies into domestic affairs of the Russian Federation, so on and so forth. So from the viewpoint of the Russian leadership, it's not a revisionist strategy, but it's an attempt to maintain the status quo and to defend this natural, quote-unquote, sphere of influence that Russia is entitled to as a great power. But speaking of Donald Trump, responding to your question, I think that there is a clear understanding in Moscow that the anti-Russian consensus remains very strong. and very broad in the United States, and it's just a political will of a single person which triggered these positive changes in the relationship. So the question is whether Moscow can build on this political will something that would have a lasting impact on the relationship beyond the Trump administration, or whether indeed diplomatic relations can be restored, whether we can see some sanctions lifted or amended, whether we can see new economic projects, whether Russia and the United States can cooperate on regional issues. So this is the challenge, and I think there is a full understanding that there is not much time to make things moving, and that this phenomenon of Trump may be a passing one.
Let me just ask you go a step further. There are reports now, Andre, that the Ukraine conflict has now cost upwards of close to 1 million lives on the Russian side of the equation. I don't know the Ukrainian side, but I imagine that's an awful number too. Is that felt? Is the sort of the ulcer of this, the trauma of this felt in Russian society?
Well, we don't know the exact statistics. There has been no official information on the losses on the Russian side. We can imagine that these losses are significant. But if you go downtown Moscow, you will not probably see many changes that took place over the last 3 years. Moscow is still a vibrant city. It is, restaurants are full over weekends. There are traffic jams. Of course, some foreign companies left the city, but it's not that visible. So I think that what the Russian leadership was able to do is to somehow separate the society from this war. People who are fighting in trenches are mostly people who signed contracts and who have quite lucrative monetary remuneration for their services. So it's not that visible. Of course, from time to time, you can see veterans of this war, and you can see some crippled people, but not too many. So I would venture to say that at least here in this city, the signs of a war are not that explicit as one could think they should be.
Angela, I'd love to ask you the same question about looking at the United States and U.S. policy now. I'm interested in how you see it, because I think what Andre just said is very interesting, that Donald Trump is a single individual. He's not yet the system. But I'm interested in whether you see systemically the United States beginning to move towards Russia in a much more cooperative, positive way and beginning to reject its classic traditional allies.
So I think that this country is very divided over that. Let me also just go back to what Andre said before, and that is I would agree that the West was unable, after the collapse of the Soviet Union, to create a post-war, post-Cold War European security architecture in which Russia had a stake. And so we're now dealing with the consequences of this.
But some people wanted to do that. Richard Haass was head of policy planning, told me he wanted Russia to have a track into NATO.
Right. Well, so I worked on policy planning with Richard Haass, and we wrote a memo describing how one would approach Russia if it wanted to join NATO. So yes, I mean, even at that point...
Did we ever even put it on the table with Russia? Because aren't you, if Russia weren't going to be in NATO, weren't you going to end up at some point back to an us versus them situation?
Yeah, so that memo never went anywhere, but we did work on it. I think Donald Trump, to some extent, is different from all of his U.S. predecessors since the end of the Cold War, and that is unlike the predecessors who tried to reset relations with Russia, and none of that never worked because they had such a fundamentally different idea of the drivers of global politics than Russia did. I think Donald Trump shares many of the same views as Vladimir Putin in terms of the drivers of world politics, the acceptability of having spheres of influence, not interfering in the domestic affairs of other countries. But I think I think this view represents a minority of Americans. It certainly does if you look at the Congress, If you look at the Russia watchers, we're split, obviously. And I think even within the Trump administration, there are different views of that. But to me, that's what's so remarkable about this, is that you do have a U.S. president who in many ways shares also the skepticism about allies. I think that's the same for President Putin and those around him. So you have a convergence of views, I think, which you've never had, at least since the collapse of the Soviet Union.
Look, the Henry Kissinger rule was you're either in bed with China or you're in bed with Russia, but never in bed with both. Now we're in bed with neither from a U.S. perspective. Yeah. And I've heard a lot of people talk about the structural integration and the deep bonds that are growing between Russia and China. That wasn't supposed to happen. Do you buy that, and are you worried about it?
Yes, so I think the idea of some in the Trump administration that if you improve ties to Russia, you have a successful reset, Russia will distance itself from China, I think that's a total illusion. I mean, I think the Russian-Chinese relationship gets closer and closer. China obviously is supporting Russia in its war against Ukraine, and I think both leaders understand that this is a long-term relationship, and certainly the Chinese don't want regime change in Russia. They don't want Russia to lose the war with Ukraine. So I think we have to accept the fact that going forward, and they both believe that we're at the dawn of a new world order, and that they will be the dominating powers there, maybe with the United States. So, you know, Russia is very dependent on China economically and in terms of its energy sales and things like that. But I think that those are the choices that the Russian political establishment has made.
Now, Andre, do you see a deepening of purpose and cause and friendship with China as one of the new features of the global strategy right now?
I would agree with Angela, but I would make a footnote. I think that there are certain quote-unquote objective limits for this cooperation. I don't think that Russia and China will ever join a political or military alliance. I think the two nations will have disagreements over a number of important foreign policy matters. For example, Russia and China are not likely to agree completely on India. They have very different perspectives on this country. I think that even if you take Ukraine, I would be surprised to see China formally recognizing the appropriation of former Ukrainian territories by the Russian Federation. I think they are concerned in Beijing about their own separatism, and that has an impact on how they approach the Russian-Ukrainian conflict. I think that Russia and China might even compete in certain areas. So I think that there are certain limitations to this relationship. But on the other hand, these are two relatively big nations, and they have a long common border. There is a natural complementarity between their economies. So even without the United States, they would have worked with each other, and we would have seen close partnership between Moscow and Beijing. On top of that, of course, we should keep in mind that there is a strong personal chemistry between Vladimir Putin and President Xi Jinping. So that is also something that has an impact on the bilateral relations. Both men have invested a lot of their own political capital in this relationship, and this is going to last.
People are used to seeing Donald Trump be such, buddies with Putin at some level. The story is very different when it comes to Volodymyr Zelensky, the president of Ukraine, with whom Donald Trump has been really, really tough, very, very short and abrupt, and critical oftentimes, and kept saying Ukraine has no cards. It has no cards. Russia has the cards. Well, a card got played recently, Operation Spiderweb. I guess, is there in this moment where both sides are muscling up with each other an opportunity for pause that we could actually get something that could lead to some sort of resolution or peace or a sustainable equilibrium?
Well, I think that we can only hope that the current escalation might ultimately lead to de-escalation and to some kind of a peace settlement. But I'm afraid that under the current circumstances, both sides are ready to go further in escalating the conflict, because Putin already stated that we have to respond to the Ukrainian act, and definitely this response has to be impressive. It's also clear that Ukraine will continue to practice what we can call asymmetrical responses to the Russian advancement along the line of contact. Since Ukraine is weak militarily, they have to look for some unorthodox way to make their case. So I think that though some de-escalation should not be ruled out, but since there is no trust between the two sides, we face the danger of further escalation. And this is something that we will see emerging maybe within the next couple of days or within the next couple of weeks. Let us only hope that this cycle of escalation will be a short one.
Joe, let me ask you about what you think about Operation Spiderweb, but also I want to ask you something else, which is really the impotence of collective action against Russia. It seems to me, Europe is now moving its 18th set of measures sanctioning Russia and various 18 times. The U.S. government has, Donald Trump has asked the Congress to pause for a moment, also considering more sanctions on Russia. But as Andre just said, it's hard to see that this is having any impact. Moscow's found the economy is growing. It seems to be riding the saddle well. What do you see as the failing of the West in curtailing or directing Russia's course?
So I think, the sanctions have affected Russia. I mean, they're on a war footing economy now. They have inflation is great. There's shortages of things in stores, maybe not in Moscow, but in other places. And most economists think that next year it'll have a greater impact on Russia. But one of the reasons why the sanctions haven't worked is there's a huge amount of sanctions evasion. And of course, if the Congress were to pass this new sanctions bill, there'd be 500% tariffs on countries that are purchasing Russian oil. Why has collective action failed? Because I do not believe that President Putin has really believed that there would be a major pushback militarily against him. And that's really the argument. And so I think the only other argument would be if there was, the West redoubles its attempts and its commitment to arm Ukraine and support it during this war. But otherwise, it hasn't worked.
Yes or no, do you think a durable peace deal is possible in the next 6 months?
No.
Andre, yes or no, do you think a durable peace deal is possible in the next 6 months?
Not a durable peace deal. No. Something less than that.
So on that optimistic note, we're going to have to bring this to a close. Wonderful conversation. Georgetown University professor Angela Stent and former director of the Russian International Affairs Council, Andrei Kortunov, thank you so much for joining us today. So what's the bottom line? The key thing here to understand is that Russia is playing a long game. And with so many lives lost, the costs of this game are really high. Russian President Vladimir Putin sees this as an acceptable cost to secure Russia's border security. But it also means that Ukraine is probably not the extent of his ambitions, and that the larger conflict in Eastern Europe is never ending, even if a peace treaty were to be miraculously secured. Ukraine is fighting for its sovereignty and its people and its national ambitions to be part of Europe. So it, too, is playing a long game. And Europe, it sees itself on the line and is playing a long game, too. But the United States, a key player, is the only one here playing a short game. It wants out, particularly under President Donald Trump. And America's departure, which I feel is really inevitable, contributes to the volatility of this moment and to the high stakes for Ukraine now. And that's the bottom line.
Connecting communities.
And so there's this fear of failure because we've got to be bigger, badder, faster. Sometimes you need to go slower to go better.
Opening up the conversation.
There is more and more segregation. And the problem is that money is held by the privileged few, but there is also gatekeeping of knowledge.
With fresh perspectives from lesser heard voices.
The only way you bring about systemic change is you have to cause some kind of disruption.
The Stream explores the key issues of our times on Al Jazeera. The first episode of this series explores the imperial origins of the drug trade.
commerce was good for the empire was good for commerce. So these things very much went together.
And opium's passage from the Far East to Europe and the United States.
If you need guns, you need money. The only money in these mountains is opium.
Drug trafficking, politics and power, the era of empires on Al Jazeera.
I'm Kerry Johnson in Doha with the top stories on Al Jazeera. US President Donald Trump says the federal government will step in to control escalating protests against a sweeping immigration crackdown in Los Angeles. The governor of California, Gavin Newsom, has criticized the Trump administration's decision to deploy the National Guard. There have been running street battles between riot police and protesters in America's second-largest city after military-style immigration raids. Well, the targeting of workers in Los Angeles has created anger and fear. Police have fired tear gas and flashbang grenades. There have also been protests in New York against the immigration crackdown. A number of protesters were detained and injured in the rally. New York also saw immigration raids on Friday. 2 men were arrested by agents in civilian clothes in the hallways of a courthouse as they tried to attend an immigration hearing. Dozens of Palestinians are believed trapped under rubble after Israeli attacks on people seeking shelter across Gaza. Several strikes hit a building in Gaza City, housing many members of one family. At least 16 were killed, including children. Civil defense teams are searching for 85 people said to be trapped in the debris. Across the Strip, Israeli strikes killed more than 70 Palestinians on Saturday. Ukraine's president says his country will not yield to pressure after Russian forces carried out strikes on the northeastern city of Kharkiv. More than 40 explosions were reported in 90 minutes in the first wave. Kharkiv's mayor says the airstrikes killed at least 4 people and injured 38. In the southern city of Kherson, authorities say 2 people were killed in an attack on a residential building. A Colombian senator and opposition presidential candidate has been shot while hosting a campaign event in Bogotá. Officials say Miguel Uribe Turbay was shot in the back at a park on Saturday. He's reportedly in a serious condition. The defense minister says one suspect has been arrested. The 39-year-old is a member of the Conservative Democratic Center Party. Those are the headlines. News continues here on Al Jazeera. That's after Africa Direct.